right, Engine Performance Expo viewers, we're here today in Jasper, Indiana at Jasper Engines and Transmissions. You know, Chuck, you used to work here, right?
Yeah, I did 20 years in these walls.
All right, and then Noah, you're here now.
Yes, sir.
So we're back here with this load cells, and there's a little fastener in here. And the reason we're here is because, guess what? There's a difference between the amount of torque you can put on that bolt and the actual clamping force. Because we really actually don't care about torque, do we? We really care about clamping force.
Yep. The engine really all it cares about is making sure that the joint is held tight enough, and torque is just our ways of getting to that point. However, what the bolt and the joint actually needs to see is the clamp load.
It's the means to the end.
Yes.
But the means don't always give you the same end.
That is correct.
So I know there's some variances that you can do with different lubes and different things that can impact it, because where is the actual most amount of friction and resistance?
It's in the threads.
In the threads?
Yep. And there's a significant amount underneath the head of the bolt as well.
So as it hits the surface that it's clamping to, that friction under the head, that's why the lube you put on it can make a big difference, right? We can put 3 different lubes on there, and for the same torque, get 3 different clamp loads, right?
Yeah, we can fluctuate the final clamp load about 15% depending on what kind of lubricant you use. If you use it dry,
you see, that's why we're here, because I love that stuff.
If you install it dry, or if you use like a more of a moly-based grease, you can fluctuate clamp load a significant amount.
We're going to try that, aren't we?
We are.
Okay.
And that's, just jumping back a little bit, the torque, by definition, is the measurement of resistance or rotation, right? So we know that there's tons of variables, and especially for us engine builders, what's the condition of the threads in the block? Do we qualify that? The threads on the fastener, are we trying to reuse a fastener? Is it a new fastener? The underhead condition, is there a washer? Where's lubrication on the washer? We set ourselves up with a lot of variables, so we can't have that variation in clamp force, and quite honestly, that's why so many engines now have a torque plus angle. Even fasteners that aren't torque to yield, and that causes a great deal of confusion, because if it's a torque plus angle, it must be torque to yield, right? No, not necessarily.
Okay. So explain real quick the difference between what we talk about, a torque to yield bolt type situation versus just a regular, hey, I'm torquing it to X foot-pounds because that's what says in the box.
Right. So the fasteners that are, and Noah, jump in, but fasteners that are designed with the torque to yield concept, again, sometimes we use the term that it works like a spring. In essence, it does, but we take them in. All of these fasteners do see some plastic deformation. There is going to be some plastic deformation.
It's whether you yield or not.
Right, whether you yield or not. And so that's probably one of the demos we'll do here. We'll actually take a fastener to yield so that we can see what's happening there.
Yeah, I have to relate everything back to the stress versus strain curve, which is a curve that material science uses to determine the strength of a material. And typical your torque to angle bolts, which is more of your, it might be a straight torque, and it might be a torque plus an angle, will only get you certain, kind of in the linear curve of stress strain curve. And then if you go beyond the yield point, that's what we typically consider a torque to yields. But in your service manuals and whatnot, a lot of times they'll just say that it's a torque to yield bolt and replace it, but that's not always the case.
How does that relate to someone that says, okay, I know that I'm going to torque based on what it says, but I'm also looking for a certain amount of stretch because the manufacturer says I need this much stretch. How does that relate?
Well, most of the time the manufacturers will tell you to use a brand new bolt in those applications, which we recommend also, but there are times where we've identified that a bolt can certainly be reused. The bolts can be tested and verified that the bolt still maintains strength after the preload point.
Got it.
And preload is the point at which the bolt gets installed to. So if we say the installation process is 60 foot-pounds plus a 90-degree turn. I'm just making this up.
Sure.
But whatever clamp load that is after that 90-degree torque is what we call the preload point. So any additional load to that, whether it be in the engine or whatever, is going to be beyond the yield point or beyond the preload point.
Got it. So, like, for example, you had some fasteners, you put them in, you stretched them with the torque, you measured it. Okay, I had X amount of stretch. Take them back out, put them back in. You have to make sure that they haven't actually elongated, because you could get if you're using that zero basis again, you could have actually already stretched it, and now you're beginning to yield it, and you won't have the clamping force that you think you have. Correct.
So we might perform a test like that, whether or not we can mount a head on an engine for mocking up purposes, and then take the head off, and then can we use those bolts again to test more or not? So,
and that's why it's kind of helpful to have this thing, right? That way you can kind of know.
Yeah. With that,
right, and that's kind of like the rig, for doing connecting rods, where it's got drill points and spot facing that you can say, okay, it's going to be acceptable if that bolt is stretched this much, and once it gets beyond that point, so people want to know, can I use it 5 times? Well, maybe not.
Right.
Maybe yes, maybe, because the dynamics of the engine may have impact on that, in addition to the stress and strain that you've from the application.
Bingo, right? Because there's a window. It can begin to stretch, but it hasn't yielded yet.
Yep.
So there could be maybe a couple thousandths or more stretch,
or what percentage of yield?
Yeah, before it actually goes.
Yep.
This is why this is so much fun. They're really tall, aren't they? I'm a little bitty tiny guy. I feel like itty bitty here, but it's okay. Big brains, big information. So we want to go ahead and do some demos.
Let's do it.
All right. Show what we got here. What's in here now?
So right now we have a Ford 7.3 Godzilla head bolt. What we're doing is we're going to basically stress this bolt all the way past its tensile strength, which means we're going to bring the bolt right up before it starts to rupture. So we're going to stretch this bolt beyond the yield point, beyond the preload point, and actually beyond the tensile strength.
We're going to break
point.
Try to.
We're going to make it really stretch,
It's going to be unhappy.
It's going to be unhappy.
So explain the rig setup here. Right? Why don't you move around that way you can show everybody what this is, because I'm the dummy, and you can show them what we got.
Right now we've got a, we'll start from the top. We have the bolt that's going into a heat-treated spacer. Then we have our load cell, and then we also have a dial indicator reading the bottom of the tip of the bolt.
So that'll give you how much stretch there is.
Yep. So the load cell will give us clamp load,
right,
which we can then calculate into what stress is.
Got it.
And then the dial indicator is then feeding us the bolt stretch, which we can calculate into strain.
Yep.
And then this is a digital readout of what the clamp load is giving us, and this is you add a 0 to this this digital number, so we're actually looking at 10 pounds instead of 1 pound.
Try to fix that just right there like that.
Yep. So now we're reading 40 pounds, and then what we're going to do is apply stress to the bolt, go all the way up. What we're going to do is go all the way up into the curve until we start to see the clamp load decrease steadily.
Oh, okay.
So at that point, the bolt will be necking, which means that the bolt is continually stretching, but clamp load is decreasing. Yep. So
let's touch base a little bit on the spacers. So if you're going to try to replicate what's happening in a particular engine application, I want to look at the thread engagement in the block and so forth. This is actually take up the space that, if you want to use the actual bolt that was going to be in the engine, you need to take up the space of the cylinder head.
Right.
So you can do things like put a gasket in between, and then it would be like a soft joint as compared to an absolute hard joint. So this is a hard joint mechanism, or semi-hard, because once you start adding layers,
like a main cap,
there's some deflection
type deal right there. Yeah, some of it doesn't have a gasket in it.
But we know once I add those layers, there's some more deflection to accommodate. It's not a dead hard joint.
Yeah, and I should specify that in the material science world, what they would do is put it into like an Instrom tensile tester, in which case that they would just pull the bolt apart. We're doing a similar test. However, we're adding a few extra variables. We're including the friction on the threads and the friction that you were talking about underneath the head. So we can fluctuate different types of lubricants on this and try to make the best we can reproduce our test results and compare how things are going to work. It's important that the spacers are heat treated because we're trying to treat this as a hard joint, and we're trying to eliminate as many variables as possible.
You don't want it moving around.
Correct. We don't want the spacer to sandwich, and with
mild steel would not work.
Mild steel, you would see it starting to deform. One thing that I should have specified before is the tip on the bolt is typically a really ugly indention, or however it's manufactured. There's usually it's not a flat surface to measure off of. So what we do whenever we do bolt testing is we chuck these up in a lathe and then face it flat. And then for some of our testing, we'll also face the head of the bolt flat as well. Sometimes if you don't have a fixture like this, you can eliminate the dial indicator and then use a micrometer to measure overall length. So this is the way we used to do it, and then we built this fixture so we can have the dial indicator feed data into a computer.
Nice. This is cool. This is fun stuff.
All right. So
there we go. Torque wrench.
Yep.
Proper torque wrench.
So we're going to increase torque and watch this go up.
All right.
So I'm going to try to get out of everyone's way.
We can see the thing here. We're good. So we're 242, 687, 872, past 1,000, 1,200. Close up on 1,300. Are we past 1,300, 14.
So remember to add a zero.
Yeah, 15. That says 15, almost 15,000 pounds then.
Which is pretty typical for the modern automotive boats.
15,000, yep. Oh, it's going the
starting
other way to it now, yep.
Yeah.
It didn't make it to 15,000.
So I can feel how the torque is starting to,
it's vacillating
starting
now.
to stretch.
Yeah.
And we can go quite a ways. Oftentimes with head bolts, a desirable feature.
Now it's 15,000. So it dropped there for a second, but now it's coming back up again.
Yep.
And you'll see work hardening and then death.
Yeah, a lot of that is because I'm not being consistent at the speed of me pulling on this. But you can start to see that the clamp load is decreasing as I'm adding more.
Yes, right there. Yeah, there it is.
So we'll stop about that point. And our final torque that we hit was about 110 foot-pounds.
110 foot-pounds of torque.
Yep.
And it's yielded that bolt now.
Yep. So the bolt is beyond the tensile strength, and it's starting to neck. We haven't got to the rupture point.
Okay.
The reason we don't go to the rupture point is because when the bolt breaks, the load cell becomes unhappy. Okay. And oftentimes load cells break.
We don't want to do that.
We don't want to do that.
We don't want to buy a load cell. No.
So yeah, we want to take the bolt as far as possible, and begin to see that necking, and then we can shut it off.
All right, so we're not going to break a bolt.
We're not going to break a bolt. We're not. We technically destroyed a bolt, but it didn't break.
There we go. It's ruined, but not broken. There's a difference.
It's going in the scrap bin, so we can loosen
don't put
this
that
up.
in an engine,
No. So what's desirable about head bolts is typically you want a long plateau as it's going up the stress strain curve. You want it to stretch a long period of time. That way the bolt can fluctuate in the length in your engine without clamp load fluctuating a lot.
Got it.
So you want to keep consistent clamp load, even though that the bolt may be stretching with thermal expansion or
you saw that once you got into a range, it really didn't matter that much, right?
It really
kind of hovering in there.
over.
Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And kind of a good way to check some of that is, okay, if I want to see where I'm at in that range, just a simple way of saying, if someone wants to pick up a load cell and they wanted to find out some of that information. So say if it's, 45 foot-pounds plus 90 plus 90. Okay, so at this point, well, where am I in that flat curve? And that's where that kind of the tattletale on that that dial torque wrench can kind of give you some insight into it. That's your, window of how long it stays in that area. Because you see it go up to like 100 foot-pounds, and it stayed there for 180 degrees. Okay, so if I have two 90s, okay, let's see what it does if I go 270 degrees instead of 180 degrees.
Okay.
And that kind of gives you that where you are in that factor, what's the safety factor, because again, you can, with lubrication and so forth, you can really mess that up. We take the friction out of the equation. And
that was dry.
Right.
Yes, that test was dry. Typically, we will always match whatever lubrication that we would use in the actual install.
Right.
So we can compare and contrast. But for this demonstration, we just installed it dry, and I would expect to get maybe several hundred pounds greater than 15,000 pounds using a different lubricant.
So you have a new one of those same ones, same bolts?
Yes. Yeah. We can
Let's try some.
that test right now.
Let's do that. Yeah. Come on.
If you don't mind threading that out, I'll get some lubricant.
And, in an environment like this, you're going to be comparing, okay, what's the OE say? Okay, they say do it with just oil. Well, if we have a particular manufacturing process or we use a different fastener, and maybe I want to achieve that clamp force, but maybe my strategy's different because there's some variation in the fastener material or... oftentimes we get the question, what's a torque to yield bolt look like? And well, years ago it was, okay, it's always necked here. They stretch in the neck area. Well, look how long the threads are. My stretch zone is actually within the threads.
Got it.
So it's quite confusing to say what is a torque to yield bolt.
So the stretch is here, not necessarily there.
Right.
Okay. And people would think that it's there because it's necked.
Right. So I'm using...
That makes sense, yeah.
1.5D, that's still kind of the rule, but if I look at the threads, I have 1 inch of threads engaged, and I have 4 inches of thread. So that zone can be controlled, because typically those aren't cut threads anymore, they're rolled.
Right, exactly.
And so they're very precision in the crest to root dimension. The radius is in the bottom of the root, so it gives you a better area to stretch than say, okay, the elongation of this piece of rod, as opposed to something that gives it that spring kind of opportunity.
Got it. Okay. All right, so we got one lubed up now.
Yep.
So you got lube under the head. And on the threads. All right. And that's some kind of moly grease, I can tell.
Yep.
Because it's dark gray.
This is about
Which, by the way, grease, the color of grease other than gray is dye. Red grease isn't better than blue or green or purple grease. They just put dye in it and make it that color, by the way. There's your tribology fun fact for the day. All right, so here we go.
This is about on the complete opposite end of the spectrum of a dry running bolt. So this is typically, this is not what you would see, or this is about as friction eliminating as possible.
Yes, yeah. Because it's a grease, because you have a very low sliding speed right here. So you're not going to build an oil film. So the grease basically gives you that higher viscosity, which can help separate those parts. So a grease will give you better lubrication in this contact than you would oil.
Yeah.
With it being grease,
and you're way past 15,000 already.
Well, yeah, and we're only getting up to about 1560 or 15,600. So it's only a few hundred pounds higher. However, it might make a bigger impact during your preload when you're actually installing the bolts.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
And without doing a test like this, you don't actually know how close you are to...
It just looked like it was coming up more smoothly, too. It was less erratic coming up, which makes sense to the direction of friction. It's less stick-slip, because what can happen is it can simulate that there's more stretch there until it has a chance to relax.
And I think you've shared this in some previous presentations about when it's greased, though, you're going to have to wait, because that's actually going to disperse its way out.
Yes,
and the clamping forces are going to be indicated that, hey, I lost clamping force. The grease is no longer there, and impact stretch.
It can move,
Space is taken up. And
so that's cool. So we were able to run it dry and run it lubed and see the difference. And that was a significant difference.
Yeah, it was several hundred pounds of clamp load difference. One thing that I guess why we use this testing methodology is to qualify aftermarket bolts here at Jasper. So what we do is we try to identify. Obviously, there's a lot of bolts out in the world, so we're trying to identify whether or not a bolt can be reused in the automotive industry in our particular cases. So if it's a head bolt where it's a critical fastener, we have to go through and scrutinize a bolt to this magnitude to identify whether or not it's going to hold up over time, and if it's even strong enough to be used. So this test helps us identify frictional differences, whether it be in the threads or under the head. It also helps us qualify the tensile strength and seeing how high will that peak go between an aftermarket bolt and this bolt. Then we'll go through and evaluate other physical properties, dimensional characteristics, making sure that the threads are rolled and not cut, and coatings. Coatings will also play a role in how much friction is being applied. So this is really what helps us. It's absolutely fundamental for us to be able to qualify aftermarket bolts.
I think one other thing we would like to do, Noah, is, okay, based on, we're talking about torque typically. Let's take a fastener, lubed and dry, but let's go to a straight torque value. Okay, what are we going to see in clamp force if we only torque this thing to, say, 65 foot-pounds? So usually we're going to have a snug value, and that's probably where we're going to get messed up in the first place, because 90 degrees is 90 degrees, 180 degrees is 180 degrees. We can mess this up early on. So let's go back to dry, torque it to, say, 65, 70 foot-pounds, because we know that we're not going to hurt the bolt at that point. Then let's lube it and see what the clamp force difference is between those 2 points.
I like it.
Y'all do what you need to do, because yes, we want to find out right there, right?
So one thing we'll want to do is the moly, the molybdenum almost like embeds itself into
the threads. Yes.
So we're going to have to clean that out, and luckily I think there's a tap right there. We can run
the tap down there.
Run the tap down it and some cleaner.
All right, so we got it cleaned up. All the molly's off. So we got our new one now that's non-lubricated, and you're going to torque it to a set value. And then we'll see what the clamp force is.
Yes, sir.
And then we'll repeat it with actually lube on it.
Correct. Correct. We're going to torque it to 65 foot-pounds.
All right.
Both times, unlubricated and lubricated. Alrighty. So right at just under 8,000 foot-pounds, or 8,000 pounds. So we're going to take this off. And the nice thing about this test, like Chuck said earlier, is that we can perform this test without worrying about the bolt deforming, permanently deforming or yielding, because we're not taking it to beyond its yield point.
Right.
So technically, theoretically, all of the deformation that's occurring here is elastic, and it will return back to the original length it was. So another 65 foot-pounds.
Let's see what we got. Whoa.
And we're up almost 300 pounds. 300 pounds over the other one.
Yeah, that's impressive. That's a big difference.
When you're installing a bolt that's right there at the critical curve, 300 pounds might make a big difference whether or not a bolt can be reused or not reused, but your overall joint assembly is actually going to work or not.
Right. That could, the difference between success and failure could be right there.
Correct.
I love it when lubrication is the go, no-go on something. It just kind of feels right to me. Well, I can't thank you guys enough for letting us come in and demonstrate this. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.
What a day, what a day, what a day. Yeah, my brain is swollen. I've learned so much today. They told us, don't start cars. We are not going to listen.